What's happening, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Crossed Up. Anthony Sanfilippo's here. I'm Bob Wankel. Phillies over the weekend in Pittsburgh open up the second half by losing 2 out of 3 games to the Pirates. They don't see Paul Skeens, and yet they still don't find a way to win a series against a team that you'd like to think that they would handle. I know that we're probably different levels of annoyance depending on who you are and how you consume those games out of the break. But I will say this season has been so good that you go into the break losing 2 out of 3 against the A's, and then you come out of it by losing 2 out of 3 to the Pirates, two teams that are, the Pirates are much better than the A's, but two teams that you don't necessarily look at and say, oh, this is going to be a problem. So, Anthony, I would ask you this, is this a reason for just a minor annoyance, or is there something a little bit more to it?
Well, there were a couple of things, Bob, I think that we can talk about that really kind of make you wonder if there's some concerns, like specifics. I mean, on the whole grand scheme of things, I look at it and say, you lost 2 out of 3 to the Pirates. Big deal, not gonna hurt you in the long run. But there were things that occurred over the weekend for individual players that I think make us go, okay, where are we with these guys? Because this is starting to become a trend, or this is starting to become, the norm for them, as opposed to what they gave us, in the first part of the season. So I think that there's certainly discussions to be had. But if you ask me on a just 1,000-foot view, lose 2 out of 3 to the Pirates first series after the All-Star break, I go, yeah, they probably should have won 2 out of 3, but okay, whatever. It's not the end of the world.
I would zoom even further back and I would look down to Atlanta, where the Braves lose 2 out of 3 to the Cardinals over the weekend. Don't gain any ground on the Phillies yet again when they had an opportunity to do so. And then, oh, by the way, they've now lost Ozzie Albies for the next 2 months. So, there's two different things happening here. It's one, where are the Phillies at? Are they playing as well as they possibly can? What are their issues internally? But then you look at them as they relate to where they're at positioned in the NL East, and you say, okay, no problem. The more time that goes on, they don't lose any ground. It's a win for them. So it's almost like, as crazy as it is, it almost feels like these past 3 days, if it was just Phillies Braves head up, sort of a win for the Phillies, which is kind of crazy because I was not particularly thrilled or impressed with the way that they played this weekend. And I want to kick it back to Friday night, which I think is the game that everybody was kind of ripping their hair out over. And I think part of it is because it is the first game out of the break. You shut it down for the entirety of the week. You come back, you're ready to watch some baseball, and then you get that performance. And when I say that performance, I mean a performance that was less than inspiring by Aaron Nola. Jose Alvarado, obviously, it was a disaster in the 9th inning. Couple stupid plays, I thought, in the infield defensively. Just inability to they scored 7 runs, which is crazy because I know a lot of people say, you score 7 runs, you should win a baseball game. And I always agree with that. At the same time, they probably should have scored 12 runs, and it felt like they missed a ton of opportunities. So it was just one of those games that was largely annoying. And if you kind of tap into your history and your DNA of watching this team over time, that was a game that by about the 7th inning, you said, I could feel them losing this game tonight. And
once
so good at not losing those games.
Yeah, once Kirkering had his bad inning, then I kind of was like, that's it. They're going to lose this game.
Yeah,
they couldn't put the Pirates away when they had the opportunity to. Now you let them back in the game, and this is trouble.
So I think there's 3 big things that kind of came away from that game that are worth talking about at a level beyond just the game itself. Number 1, Aaron Nola. You come out, you get staked to a 3-0 lead, and then you blink, and I believe he recorded 1 out by the time he had given up the 3 runs in the bottom half of the first. Not what you want to see out of him, not what you necessarily expect out of him. I have a feeling here, you and I talk about this. Are we going to just chalk this up to the prolonged break, the lack of rhythm? And, is that all that was, or was there a little bit more reason for concern with Aaron Nola?
No, I think it is. I think it's the break. And it's not an excuse, but because if you look at the rest, after those first 4 guys where he gave up the 3 hits, right, and they were hard hits, all of them. Yeah. Yes. He actually pitched pretty well the next 4+ innings, right? Give up 1 run over those 4+ innings, and was actually more Aaron Nola-esque. So I look at it and say, Pirates, credit to them, they jumped all over a guy who was – in the first inning trying to find his pitches and took advantage of it. So yeah, you're disappointed, and it was not a great start by any stretch of the imagination. But I don't think it's going to impact Nola going forward. I think he's very consistent in the kind of pitcher that he is, and I think he'll be fine.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about Bryson Stott. We've talked a little bit about Bryson Stott in bits and pieces here over the past couple of weeks. I even floated out to you about a month ago, like, is there a world where maybe they trade Bryson Stott? A team might like him. He's a young, interesting player. He's under team control. He's got some playoff experience. He seems to do well in big moments. He's not having a very good season, and I thought it was interesting over the All-Star break. He sent out a post on Instagram, and it was like that meme. It's like, they had me in the first half, not going to lie. And it's like, here he comes. He's ready to go in the second half. He knows he underperformed. I'm going to come after it. And then you check the lineup coming back, and you got Martin Perez on the mound for the Pirates. Bryson Stott's on the bench in favor of Edmundo Sosa. I don't really mind in certain situations trying to optimize a lineup and looking at platoon splits and left-right. I was surprised out of the break. You have Bryce Harper talking about how one guy was missing from the All-Star game, it being Bryson Stott, not there in the infield with Bohm and Turner and himself. Here we are, like, set the stage, set the tone for the second half, and he's not in the lineup. I want to get your reaction to that, because I kind of thought it was strange personally. And then he comes in, has an O for Saturday, and then's out of lineup again on Sunday. Like, very weird. And I think in a way telling weekend about how the Phillies feel with Bryson Stott right now. So your reaction to where we're at with him right now. And then let me just kick it back to you. If they don't value him enough to play him against two marginal left-handed starting pitchers, like, could they possibly be thinking about a world without Bryson Stott, whether it be this season or beyond?
So I'll answer the second part first. I don't think they're trading Bryson Stott this next week at the deadline. So Bryson Stott's on this team for 2024.
I agree.
I think he's probably here 2025 as well. But at some point, they're going to have to make a decision on whether or not Trey Turner sticks at shortstop. He's as great as he's hit, right? And he does make some nice plays sometimes. He's a butcher over there at others, right? He boots balls. He throws wide. I mean, the errors are way too high for a shortstop defensively. So maybe at some point you think about moving Turner over to second base. Well, then what do? And I don't know, a year ago, we probably would have sat here and said, well, yeah, Bryson Stott moves to third base and they move on from Alec Bohm. And now that philosophy may have flipped. Maybe Bohm's more attractive to keep in your lineup and you do move on from Stott. So I do think that there's a world where that can happen down the line. I don't think it's immediate, and I don't think it's going to be next season as well. As for the weekend, I think it's very telling where the Phillies are with him right now. And maybe it was a message sent to him because he's sat out against lefties before. This is not a surprise, but he usually sits out against tough lefties. When you're sitting out against Martin Perez and Marco Gonzalez, who are a couple of middling left-handers at best, and probably subpar in reality, that's more telling because it's like, okay, we don't even trust you against these guys. I don't know. I think if
I guess I could have seen it like playing him against Perez first game out of the break if he struggles and then backs it up on Saturday night against a righty and struggles, and then okay, you get Sunday off. Like, you had two cracks at it, you didn't get it done. But to bookend the weekend with him on the bench in both games, mixed in with the offer, it's like, okay. I mean, we've talked about it on the show. I mentioned to you, if you go back to May 19th, it's about a 2-month run. He's been out of 21 second basemen. He's 20th in OPS and 21st now in average. Not good enough, right? Like, I think we all agree with that. Talk about the walks and progress isn't linear, and this is just a young player going through it. But those things all can be true. But I'm looking at it in two different ways. I'm like, man, is this really where they're going to be at with him for the remainder of this season? And 3 months ago, I would have told you that this guy's going to be here for 10 years. And now I'm wondering, like, well, if they move him to shortstop because Trey Turner's defense has deteriorated to a point where you cannot do it, it's untenable. Can you play Bryson Stott at shortstop and let him have a 680 OPS and say, we're fine with that? Like, yeah, but that's not what you thought you were getting here. So I don't want to overemphasize the immediacy. Like, he doesn't need to get it together tonight. It's not like if Bryson Stott doesn't get going tonight, he's not going to be here in a week. But I'm really I'm not confused. I mean, I totally get it. They just don't think he's hitting well enough right now. He's not productive enough. I understand it, but I'm surprised by it. I'm surprised that he wasn't given an opportunity this weekend to try to gain some momentum here and start the second half strong.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bob, and that's why I'm a little. I say it's a red flag because I'm not sure if it was just send a message to him that you're not playing well, get it together, or if it's
Just a weird
hey,
time to send a message. It's not the 11th game in 12 days. I mean, it was the first game out of the break. That's the one I really circle. I go, come on. I'm like, Martin Perez. And to me, it's like one of the things that they're really good at. And so I will concede that it's very possible that there was a discussion with him. He understood it. He bought into it. I don't know, right? Like, I do not know. But when I think about whatever platoon advantage that Edmundo Sosa gives you in the lineup on Friday night over really, like, you talk about team chemistry and like they want Bryson Stott to succeed. The players in the clubhouse want Bryson Stott to succeed. It almost felt, and bear with me here, it almost felt Kepler-esque. It was like, are we trying to maximize this very moment here on a Friday night in Pittsburgh, or are we trying to make a decision that kind of instills confidence and has like bigger picture ramifications? And I think more often than not, Rob and this staff handles those moments and those situations exceedingly well. And maybe they did handle this one right. I don't know. I'm not saying they didn't, but man, like I was surprised by it. I thought it was the single most interesting thing that happened this weekend, actually. And I know a lot of people might be like, nah, come on, man. Tyler Phillips, 6 shutout innings, which we'll get to, and was very interesting. But I don't know. I think it's really, how about this? Let me give you this one. Do you agree that it's unlikely that both Bryson Stott and Alec Boehm are here beyond 2026? Like, this kind of feels like an either or, does it not?
It does. It absolutely does. I think it's one or the other stays. I do not think both stay.
And I've always leaned that it would be Stott because of the positional flexibility. You can play him at second. You can play him at short. Whereas Bryce Harper's your first baseman and you don't love Alec Boehm defensively at third. What does that look like in 2 or 3 years? Do you really want to go down that road? Maybe he's a DH. I don't know. Kyle Schwarber's not going to be here forever. But it just, to me, like, it felt more likely that Bryson Stott would be the guy here. But based on what we've seen through, almost 100 games this season, it doesn't feel like that, at least in this moment.
Yeah. It's fascinating that we're even having this conversation, Bob. It really is, because beginning of the season, like, we thought Stott was one of the dudes, like one of the guys. Like, here's a guy poised to like break out even more. Like, he had a great year last year, and you thought it was going to get even better. Just work on a little bit of pitch selection, plate discipline, take a few more walks, that kind of thing, which he's done this year. That part of his game, he has improved. But in the process of doing that, he's taken a big step back otherwise. And now it's like the Phillies are looking at it saying, okay, well, we're trying to win a World Series this year. We still love Bryson Stott. He still brings a lot to this team. He's a Gold Glove caliber second baseman. There's a lot to really still like about him. We're not abandoning him, but we think we have a better chance of winning games against left-handed pitchers with Edmundo Sosa. Yeah. Like, that's something that I never thought we would be discussing this year.
Yeah. Well, it's something I think that's certainly worth keeping an eye on. And to be clear, I do not expect him to be traded. I don't think that the Phillies have necessarily given up on Bryson Stott, but I do think that they are signaling to him that you may not be the best option for us in the immediate future to get to where we want to go. And I do think it's fair. I do. Like, I think it would be disingenuous for me to come on here and say, like, are the Phillies done with Bryson Stott? Like, I don't think that's the question, but are we at a point where the Phillies are either trying to signal to him, yo, it's time to get going, or we can't proceed like this because you aren't playing well enough? And we might have to start evaluating our options here, both in the short term and long term. I don't think that that's an unreasonable question right now. And their actions are lead me to read it that way. Just like last week when I said to you about Michael Mercado going back out there in the 5th and 6th inning, that looked to me like a pitcher that they were about to dispose of. at the major league level. Like, take one for the team, given the situation. And lo and behold, you get the Friday night. He's there, but he doesn't pitch. Saturday, he's gone. I think the Phillies, if you watch the Phillies and you watch how they maneuver with their players, I think it's very clear, where their mindset is with him right now. Which, by the way, I was listening to Rob Thompson saying, like, he's done a really good job talking about Weston Wilson. He's done a really good job since he's been up here, or since we brought him back with us. Like, he's a placeholder, right? Like, he's not. Is he taking at bats in the middle of August, Weston Wilson?
He might still be on the roster.
Yeah.
I mean, but I don't think he's getting regular bats. He might be the fifth outfielder. But I mean, one last thing with the Stott thing. They're Minnesota. This series coming up against Minnesota, you're probably getting 3 right-handers. They haven't announced a starter for the third game, but I'm pretty sure it'll be Chris Paddock. So you got Bailey Ober, who's again mediocre righty. Simeon Woods Richardson, who's actually been pretty solid for them as another righty on Tuesday, and then probably Paddock, who's been not good on Wednesday. I gotta imagine Bryson Stott's in the lineup for all 3 games, and these are all pitchers that he should be able to try and get some his offense going against. This is a big series for him.
Yeah, this is one where you expect to meet on Friday. You and I talk and say, hey, how about the week that Bryson Stott had? We broke him out of his funk when we started to talk about what the long-term plan was with him. That's what you expect, but for the last 2 months, he has not shown anything that would tell you, that's about to happen. So we'll see. I think the other thing that is worth talking about is the way that the game was handled on Friday night. And in fairness, you see Matt Strahm come into a game on Saturday night, gives up 2 runs late. He has not been great lately himself. But the Phillies elect to go to Jose Alvarado in the 9th inning. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that because, armchair quarterback guy, me sitting here in real time said, are they really going to do Jose Alvarado with a 1-run lead in the 9th inning? Like, you want to try, if you want him to break out of his funk and whatever he's going through, and you want it to be a save situation because you feel like he needs that adrenaline, which is something they talked about last week against the A's, wasn't a save situation. Sometimes that takes a little juice out of you. Okay. I think that's nonsense personally. I really do. But fine, I'll concede that. So if you want to have him in that save situation, cool, multi-run maybe, but 1 run the way that he's pitched right now, I thought was a very dangerous decision, and it backfired on him, and it backfired on him pretty quickly. Now, I'll ask you this. Do you think that the mindset was an acknowledgement that, man, Jose is going through it right now? Obviously, we need him to pitch well. Let's just hope that the All-Star break reset him. If it doesn't work out for a pitcher like Aaron Nola, it's because the All-Star break threw him off his rhythm. But if you're pitching like, I'm not going to be mean. If you're pitching poorly, the All-Star break will bring you back. The All-Star break it only hurts you if you're good. So Jose Alvarado comes back. He picks up right where he left off, and that's not a good thing. And they lose the game. Was that like the line in the sand on Friday night? Like, okay, we wanted to give him the break to see if that would fix it. It didn't. Now we have to dial him back, make him the 7th inning guy. Use him the way that you saw him on Sunday afternoon. Game was not in jeopardy. It's not the 9th inning. Let's see if we can work some things out with you. Kind of like they did with Gregory Soto a couple months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that when you look at it, I don't have a problem with the decision to go to him there because I think that was their mentality. Like, okay, he's been our guy. He's going through it. Maybe the 4 days was all he needed. And the reason is, Bob, the reason that they are comfortable doing that, and I'm comfortable with it as well, is his stuff is still there. I mean, dude, it's still throwing 100, right? I mean, he's still got that nasty what is it? He doesn't throw a splitter. Why am I? What is it? Cutter, right? Cutter. He throws a cutter, right? He's still got that pitch. It's pretty nasty. He's just not hitting his spots, and that's really the problem with him right now. He's either wild and he's walking too many guys, or when he's in the strike zone, he's catching too much of the strike zone. He's not hitting the black, right? So that's why he's become hittable. So I guess when you look at it and say, okay, let's see, maybe a few days off was all he needed. We'll put him back in the role that he's used to being in, and then he blows it. Now it's like, all right, now we make the change. So it's not like you didn't want to give him the benefit of the doubt for the All-Star break. So that's why I didn't have a problem with them doing it. Yeah, it cost them the game. It's unfortunate, but I don't question it. I do think that they are going to continue to do with him like they did with Soto. He's not going to pitch in high leverage for a little bit and try and get it back. And he was okay Sunday. Did give up a hit, but two strikeouts. Yeah. So I think that's the kind of thing.
You look at his July. He's made 7 appearances this month, 6 and a third innings, 10 hits allowed, 7 earned runs. He gave up 1 homer, walked 5, only 6 strikeouts. I mean, he's got a 9.95 ERA in 7 appearances this month. And like, look, that might happen. Like, there's going to be parts of the season, periods of the season where you're not sharp. But this has been more than just a 2-game run or a 3-game run. This has now been for the better part of a month. You don't feel great about where he's been at. Really, since that Mets game in London, that was where I feel like that this started. He came in and it just kind of unraveled on him. And since then, I mean, he's had some scoreless appearances. Like after that Mets game, in all fairness, 5 of his next 6 appearances, he didn't allow an earned run. But like I felt like they were sort of a little bit more, they were less clean, and then in July.
Look at the hits. I mean, I wrote about this the other night. How many hits that he's given up since, hits and walks, the base runners that he's given up since that Mets game in London. It's I forget exactly what the exact number was in my story, but it's a lot. It's way too many for a guy who's pitching at the back end of your bullpen. Doesn't necessarily.
He went from a 2.96 ERA entering that Mets game, and he's at 4.24 today.
Yeah,
I mean that's
and it came down.
And it came down from 4.35, which is where it peaked after Friday night. So, and the reason why I bring this up, because we can all sit here and say, all right, 8.5 game lead, let him recharge his batteries, use him as a 7th, 8th inning guy when it's not super high leverage. Cool, no problem. The thing is, oh, by the way, here comes a trade deadline. We know the Phillies are going to do things. I wouldn't say they're going to do something. I think they're going to do some things. I have sat here and talked about how much I like this bullpen. I still do like this bullpen. Overall, I still believe in Jose Alvarado. I think it'd be silly to take what he's done over the last 2 years and write it off because he's had 3 really bad weeks. That being said, though, he's leaking oil. Matt Strahm has not been quite as sharp lately. You saw what Kerkering did the other night. Jeff Hoffman continues to be really good. Do they need another bullpen piece? Do they need another guy to add to this mix to really shore it up and solidify what they have going into the postseason? Because in my mind, this is a strength of the team, but in this moment, as the trade deadline looms, you can poke some holes in it.
Yeah, I think that they're going to add to the bullpen. I just don't think it's going to be a closer type. Like, I really don't. I think that they like the option of matching up. It's what they've done the last 2 postseasons with success. I mean, go back to game 1 against the Braves last year. It was a masterclass in bullpen use. Just with matchups, we got our guys and we're going to throw them at you when we throw them at you. That's how they like to use their bullpen in the playoffs. And I don't think that they want to add a guy who is 9th inning guy only. So I don't, everybody let's trade for Mason Miller. First of all, I don't think Oakland's going to trade him. But secondly, I don't think that's the target. That type of guy is the target, or even a Tanner Scott, right? Although that one's probably a little bit more likely because he has been in other roles in recent seasons with the Marlins, not necessarily just as a closer. So maybe on that one, but I mean,
can I interest you in Kyle Finnegan out of Washington, who just swept the Reds? So now I'm like, well, are they going to hang around in this thing, or what are they doing?
Well, I mean, Finnegan's an interesting guy, but he's only because he's also been in that other setup type role, not always been a closer. So like, if you're going to look at a guy like that, I think there's a possibility, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a right-hander again, because you already have 3 lefties in the pen, and can
I just dream for a moment about the Mason Miller thing? Like, I know it's not going to happen. I don't think they're going to trade for him. But like, when someone lays it out and says to me, like, you bring him in, like, and I know they mix and match, and I know that this isn't even what it would be, but like, just a world where you have Hoffman and Miller like just sitting back there in like the 8th and 9th inning. And then, oh, by the way, we have Kerkering, who I still really like. We have Strahm, who I still really like. We have Alvarado, who I think can get you key outs in the postseason. Like, you are in a world where you probably, if you take a 2-1 lead past the 5th inning, are going to win the game. And you probably will. This bullpen, I think, is still good enough that you feel reasonably confident that they will anyway. But, man, if you added that guy to the mix, it's just like turn out the lights in the sixth.
Yeah. Yeah,
Let me
for
ask you
sure.
this. Everyone keeps saying, well, like, look, you go back to last postseason and getting a bat is stupid. You got to go reliever. If it's one or the other, it's got to be reliever. It's got to be reliever. It was the bats last postseason that like let you down in game 6 and 7. That's why you have to go address that. I'm not opposed to that. I mean, I've been talking about the need to add a bat now for 2 months. So it's not that I'm against that, but the rationale to arrive at that point using game 6 and 7 in the NLCS of last year doesn't make any sense to me. Like, just because something happened for a 3-game stretch and especially a 2-game stretch at home late in the playoffs last year doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be what kills you again. Like, there's no reason to say, oh, well, it happened once. That's obviously the weakness. You have to go fix it. I look at it and say, like, maybe the offense shows up and you lose a game 8-7 in the playoffs this year if you don't address the bullpen. Like, I think that they have to do both. I really do. I think it would be a shame if the Phillies let this trade deadline come and go and not get a bat of consequence from the right side that can play the outfield and another guy that you feel good about inserting to any variety of situations in the 7th, 8th, or 9th innings that can record key outs. I think that they need both of those pieces. We've talked about probably adding another starter because you don't know what you're getting out of Taijuan Walker. You don't know what Spencer Turnbull's deal is. Obviously, Michael Mercado's a non-factor, but here's now our guy Phillips, who was great yesterday. I didn't want to overreact after 2 appearances, so I'm not going to overreact after 3, but he's at least giving them something to think about, is that if they went to a 6-man rotation, could he hold it down? They got, we have 5 minutes left in this show. We're approaching the trade deadline. It wasn't a great weekend. I'm not going to sit here and have a meltdown over the Phillies losing 2 out of 3 to the Pittsburgh Pirates, but let's talk about what it means now, because it's hammer time, right? Like, what happens over the next 9 days here is going to dictate what we're talking about come October.
Well, I'll tell you that what happens over the next 9 days here is going to be impacted more by what happens away from the Phillies games around the league. And this was going to be something I brought up for one last thing, so why don't we hit it? The Reds, after getting swept, have now said that they're willing to trade some expiring contracts. Okay, here's a team that we have not discussed as a possible seller at the deadline that is now suddenly becoming one. There are going to be teams that over the course of the next 5 days, I would say, suddenly go from being either a buyer to a seller, or from that chunky middle where we don't know into sell range. And I think it's going to get a little bit more interesting, Bob, because I think that there's going to be suddenly names that no one's really been talking about. Like, we've all been talking about the same names for a while now.
Yep.
But I think that there's going to be names that nobody's even brought up that are suddenly going to become available. And that's when I think the Phillies are going to strike, because I look at it and say, because there was a name that came up, and we didn't even talk about it on the show because it came up after we last spoke last Monday. But there was a name that came up that the Phillies were interested in that I was like, on both sides, because I didn't think that the Phillies would be interested in this guy, and I didn't think that the team that wanted to move him would want to move this guy, considering where they're at. And it's Cedric Mullins from the Orioles.
I have no interest. I have zero interest in Cedric Mullins.
Where did this come from, and why? Like, that's I don't have interest in him either. He's left-handed, doesn't fit the mold. He's an okay center fielder defensively, but he's having a terrible year.
Terrible year.
Like, so I'm not so, but it's interesting to me that's
Kevin Long. If I were a GM, if I'm Dave Dombrowski, I'm Sanford, and Kevin Long knocks on my door and says, "Hey, have you seen Cedric Mullins this year? He sucks. I know why. I will fix him in 3 days." Like, I said, okay. Like,
yeah.
And are you willing to put your job on it? That's the only, and that's not how this works. So, like, that's the only world in which I would entertain that idea. I just don't understand how that moves the needle for you in any way, shape, or form.
It doesn't. But what I'm saying is that there are names that are going to come out of the blue, and that one kind of came out of the blue. Yeah. Like, no one would have thought that 2 teams that are pushing for the World Series would potentially make a trade with each other, and yet that came out of the
I
blue.
love it. Jazz Chisholm, and we had heard Ruben Amaro 2 months ago, who to whatever degree is plugged in a little bit here, right? Says
Right.
there's no way. It will never, ever happen. It's not going to happen. And then you see his name floated out there. Oh, the Phillies are interested. Now they're not. Tommy Pham is another name. We've talked about Tommy Pham on this show before. Decent hitter, right?
Yeah.
I talked to some people involved in that organization who played with Tommy Pham or like know Tommy Pham, and no thanks. Was the that what I was told. I believe you heard the same thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. So then you're right. You hear these names, but like, did anything happen over the weekend that frees up a name of interest? Like, do you think there's a team that today, other than the Reds, is more likely to be willing to listen than they were, over the All-Star break?
I think you'll see that come up, like I said, over the next 5 days. I think that we'll see after this next series and maybe the beginning of the following series. I think that's when it's gonna really hit. So I don't know. I mean, I think
there's five definites right now. There's 5 definites: the Blue Jays, the White Sox, the Angels, and Athletics are 4 definites. I think the Rangers are going to move pieces.
Right.
And then I think the Tigers have to just, I think the Tigers have to consider it. And the Rays, I think, should be open to it because the Rays aren't going to get there.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but they're still in it a little bit, right?
They've beaten, it's a 4-game series, but they have that weird wraparound with the Yankees this afternoon, but 2 out of 3 against the Yankees this weekend, who continue to just flat out suck. I mean, the Yankees have been one of the worst teams in baseball, both from the pitching side and the hitting side for about 5 weeks now.
I don't know why you would listen to any other podcast, Bob.
I mean, we're all over that. Now, if they come out and go get Garrett Crochet and all, like, that would be interesting, if they're willing to do what they do, which they probably will have to do something big. But, I mean, that team's been a disaster.
Yeah, no, and as far as in the National League, I mean, like the Reds, I still think that even though the Nationals have played well, I don't think that they're going to try and climb into it. I think that they will sell a couple pieces. I think they realize that they're still probably a year away. I wonder about the Cubs. I think the Cubs
might have saved their season, albeit temporarily, yesterday. Down 1-0, 9th inning, about to be swept at home by Arizona. They win in extra innings. It at least gives them a couple days here to, I think, make a decision. The Pirates, I think, had a really interesting weekend because by beating the Phillies 2 out of 3, now not only are they a game over 500, but say the Pirates come out and get swept this weekend and they're 47-52 right now, and we're just not quite ready yet. But now I think they're right on that fringe where they say, maybe we add a bat and see what happens here.
Yeah, I mean, they're a dangerous team with their pitching. If they get in, like I think I said a couple podcasts ago, like that would be the one team in the National League that I look at and go, yeah, I don't want to face that pitching in a short series. So that's the one that I think they stay in. I think obviously the Padres and the Diamondbacks, the Mets, surprisingly, I think are going to stay in. The Giants are another team, though. Like, where are you with the Giants? Like, I look at those teams and I see like Giants, Cubs, Reds. I think those teams are going to this week, if they don't have a good week, are going to go into sell mode.
I agree. And I'm not a Giants believer as it is. They're in 4th place in that division. I don't think there's any reason to think that they're going to leapfrog. I mean, I know they're not far back in terms of the actual standings, but I think the Padres and Diamondbacks are both better than the Giants. So I don't say want to add to change it, but as is, I wouldn't. If I were them and I have a part that makes sense to let go of, I would consider it. So it's really, I mean, I know we're at our time here. We had to be short today, but I mean, it's the next few days as you're watching the Phillies in Minnesota, watch everything else because you're right. What happens beyond the Phillies is going to be just as much a part of what happens as the Phillies address their own needs.
And if the Giants drop out of it, I'll give you a name that I like for that bullpen. Ryan Walker.
I thought you were going to give me like a Rogers throwing the ball from scraping the ground.
Nope. Ryan Walker. He's got a whip. He's got a whip under 1 out of the bullpen there. In 52 innings, he's been used a lot, that's the one concern. But 2.41 ERA, 64 strikeouts in 52 innings. Guy brings it, and I think he's an interesting name that I would look at if the Giants decided they're going to sell.
What do you got this week in Minnesota?
I think they win 2 out of 3, even though the Twins have been hitting really well. I'm going to be curious to see what what Suarez and Wheeler look like after 2 weeks off. But something tells me that Wheeler is going to be just fine. Suarez is the interesting one to me, and then I just don't like the pitching that the Twins have going in these 3 games. I think that the Phillies can hit them, so I'll take the Phillies win 2 out of 3.
Twins have mashed left-handed pitching this season.
Yeah,
they have the best OPS in the American League against left-handed pitching. So this is a tough test for struggling Ranger Suarez tonight, and it will be very interesting to watch. And it's important for the Phillies. I mean, this is a big game tonight, I think, for them for a lot of different reasons. So, all right, look, we'll hit it there. We'll end it there. For Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. We'll be back later this week. If anything of consequence happens before Friday, we might be back before Friday. So we'll talk to you then.